I'm Lauri. As mentioned, I'm one of the founders at Montel and currently acting as the COO, which means that I spend large portions of my day thinking about how we can improve how we build products at Montel, and then also get my hands dirty with a lot of client projects. Sorry I couldn't be with you there today. Hopefully I'll get a chance to meet you guys live at some of the next events that we have. Today I'm not going to talk about any of the client projects or any of that funky stuff we built, but rather a very silly project I've done on my own over a few nights during the past few weeks. And it's called Game of Life Deathmatch version. And to the essential question of why and maybe the how, and then also a bit of a game test we'll go through during this presentation. Just to ensure that we're all kind of on the same line, I'm sure many of you know what Game of Life is. It's actually not a game, so it lies directly in the first word. It's more of a simulation, a cellular automaton created by this guy called John Conway back in 1970. And the simulation takes place on a two-dimensional grid where each cell of the grid is either alive or dead based on the count of alive neighbors it has. And it's interesting because these very simple rules create a simulation that keeps on going and going. And if you change the rules even a bit, everything falls apart. And then certain combinations of live cells can create these kind of funky effects. Like here we have the GIF animation is showing, I think that's called a glider gun or something similar, kind of a combination where you have an engine that creates these glider looking alive cells. And there's a lot of academic research and non-academic research and all sorts of stuff related to the Game of Life. So it's a bit of a rabbit hole if you really want to dive into it. It wasn't my first time dealing with Game of Life. Back in the day at the University of Art and Design, as part of my master thesis, I built this fairly large LED panel that had an 8x8 grid. And it was interactive, but it needed some kind of a screensaver so that it would attract people to play with it. And I chose Game of Life because it only took 40 lines of Python to implement the whole thing. And it worked really nicely. It's a good kind of an example or a good kind of a option for implementing some kind of a simple screensaver. But now years later, I started thinking that, okay, that was a static screensaver. Could I take that Game of Life? Could I make it interactive? Could I make it actually a bit more game-like? And it's not a novel idea. As soon as I came up with the idea of, hey, deathmatch, and Googled it, I saw that there were 50 different implementations already online with the same title. But that wasn't really the real reason. The real reason was that I wanted to have an excuse to use Flame. Most of the Flutter stuff I built at Montel deals with custom hardware, so with robotic teddy bears or motion sensing technology. And a lot of it is with Bluetooth, so I rarely get to do anything on the front end side. So now I wanted to do something that's completely at the other end of the spectrum. So one thing is Flame, which is a minimalistic game engine for Flutter. And the other reason I wanted an excuse to build something with Flutter Web. As a third reason, I also wanted to take a closer look into the Dart language, because if you look at the popularity curves on Stack Overflow, for instance, you'll see that Dart follows really closely how Flutter goes. And so it's basically usually you talk about the same thing when you talk about Dart and Flutter. But Dart is actually a really powerful language on its own, and I wanted to learn more about it while doing this. And of course, fourth reason, building games is usually almost always kind of fun. Let's have a test if it actually works. I'll you can, if you have a mobile device, I don't know, maybe you do, you can visit this URL. I'm going to give the people on the internet side a bit of a head start. You should see, here's the server running. You should see a very simple game of life running. Oh no, let's see if we can handle the load. Running on the server. The mechanics are simple. Tap somewhere on the screen and you'll get some live cells with your color. And you can do this 5 times in a row, and after that you'll need to wait a bit for your live cell count to go back up. And then it's all about simulation. Then you might end up winning, you might end up on the top 3 and at the right top corner, or you might not. Seems computer is still winning. We still haven't beaten the original red color. Bit of a shame. See if we can become a bit more professional in this. While you guys play, I'll talk a bit about the technology behind and then what I kind of discovered. So the game is of course using WebSockets for communication, as we're deploying on top of Flutter Web. The backend is purely implemented in Dart because I really want to get more deeper into the language, and it has no external dependencies at all. So you get the HTTP servers, you get the WebSockets directly out of the standard stuff. The front end depends on Flutter, of course, Flame, and then WebSocket channel, which is basically an easy way to use WebSockets and recommended also by the Flutter developers. And deploying it is basically a few Docker files, maybe with 3 lines of code per Docker file. One is Nginx serving the Flutter Web, and one is then just a Dart-based Docker file serving the server itself. And if you want to take a look at the code, it's freely available from that URL. I'll put it somewhere so you can access it easily. If for some reason you want to do modifications, I'm happy to give you more permissions to do so. So what were my takeaways from doing this simple project? One is that Flame works quite nicely. They're gearing up right now for version 1.0. So it's not really beta quality. They've done quite a bit of changes between the earlier versions and now going up to 1.0. So when you read your documentation, be sure that you're reading something current. It's super simple to work with. It's basically subclassing a class called game from Flame and then implementing 2 methods, update and render. So it's very close. If you've used creative coding frameworks like Processing or Open Frameworks or Cinder, then it's a very similar approach to those. And it's really good for smaller games. If I was implementing Commander Keen, I would probably pick Flame. That would be a nice for sprites, for basic physics, audio, inputs, and that sort of stuff. But you shouldn't compare it to Unity or Unreal Engine or whatever, like the real behemoths of the industry. I wouldn't implement Quake with it, but I would implement Commander Keen with it. It's fun to work with. Maybe something to really consider is, if you're putting an Easter egg in your application somewhere, you want to implement that Space Invaders thing when you click on that secret button in the About page. Then Flame could be a very good choice for that. It kind of very nicely ties into your Flutter workflow. Another good finding for me was that Dart is actually a very fun language to work with. I got more intimate with the double question mark notation, the double dot notation, and all those fancy Dart features that I rarely use with much of the other code. And now probably in the future I'll use those more. It's also it was pleasant to work with on the server side, although Probably if I would actually implement the game server, I would go with Elixir or something more web-oriented. But Dart is nevertheless a very good language. And of course, the benefit of using the same data structures for both the server side and the client side is of course a huge win. And what else? Developing games is still fun. I didn't get bored of it. It's a great way to get acquainted with a new language or a new framework that you're dealing with. That was basically it from the presentation side. Let's see how. Okay. Player number 13 is winning. Nice, good. We've completely destroyed the computer. Good. Humans still rule. Who's player number 13? Hands up. Nobody in the crowd? Nobody comes forward. Okay. Good. If any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Or if nothing else, I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
I want to know who's winning.
Yes. Yeah.
Secret contender. Is the computer with another color?
How do I know what's my name?
It's the big number on.
It's me actually.
It's you.
You know, I had a name. So.
Elina, you'll need to come up with some kind of a prize there.
Yes,
Free
sure. One more slice for you.
Cool. Any questions? If nothing, then